if you keep lying to yourself, you're only poisoning your soul. And I believe that in some aspect, because once I started admitting what I was and making art that I found interesting, uh, things got better for me. Like I got a better job, I got a better offer, I improved that as an artist, I got a lot of support from people that believed in me. I lost a lot of support from other people, but I think there is truth to that. Like if you keep lying, you're not gonna go very far.
Welcome to another episode of Live Free. I'm your host, Gene Owens. My guest today is an accomplished comic book artist and illustrator. He is currently the lead artist at Rippaverse Comics and a content creator at Being Libertarian. Please welcome Igor Chakal.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jin. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you. Before we get into our recent collaboration and how you came on my radar, I'd love to hear about, where you're from and when you first kind of set forth on this path towards becoming a comic book artist and an illustrator.
Yeah. Uh, so yeah, my name is Igor. I'm from Brazil. You guys will tell by the accent at some point, pretty soon, I guess. I'm 34 years old actually. I turned 34 last month, and I always loved comics, so I started wanting to be an artist like since I was like 12. I worked on like small comic books as a hobby since I was a kid. My dad used to give me like blank pieces of sheet that he's a salesman, so he had like info from clients and stuff that he wasn't using anymore. So he gave me like blocks, and I would use those to scribble like small comics with like Batman, Spider-Man, stuff like that. So I always loved those. I'm from the Image Comics era, so I'm like a big Spawn fan. I used to collect all of those, although they were not for my age, but I love those. So I always wanted to draw and copy other artists and do stuff like that. And when I turned 18, I got accepted at the University of São Paulo, which is the biggest university in Brazil. So I moved from my small town to the biggest city in Brazil, to São Paulo, to study fine arts. And then after that, I got a scholarship in illustration to study in England for a year. So I went there to study illustration, which like kind of those experiences were pretty like different from each other because the public university in Brazil is the biggest one. So contrary to the United States, we have like state universities with free education for those who get accepted in it, but it's mostly like for rich people. So it turns out not to work. I came from a public background. I studied public schools, so I was the only student there that wasn't like attending private school prior to getting accepted through our SATs, you could say. Like
And
they
this was
have
getting accepted at the
at the University
University
of
of
São
Sao
Paulo.
Paulo,
Yeah.
because even though it is a state school and free to the public, quote
Yeah.
unquote, most of the people that actually get accepted are from richer, more wealthy
Oh yeah,
backgrounds.
definitely. Like I had I studied basically all my childhood in public schools. My mom's a teacher and my dad is a salesman, so we had like a pretty tight budget to go through. And but my since my mom is a teacher, she always like valued like doing well in school, trying to get best grades and stuff like that. So I got accepted, and then the experience was hellish because the public university is focused on making a certain type of individual and line of thought like that you have to follow. And I wasn't that guy. Like I wasn't accepting of ideas that were like just believe this and you're gonna be fine. That's not my style. So I had a lot of problems with my classmates. There is a lot of influence of small left-wing parties in that realm of the public university in Brazil. usually the candidates that they have, the congressman and congresswoman, will be picked from the universities, so from the public universities. So it's kind of like a test ground for what it's gonna be their public like the electorate, right? So the people
Right.
that get elected and the people that vote is usually they come from that upper class students that like live that lifestyle of trying to engage with the poorer masses, like the people that are poor, but they really aren't like the same people. So I would hear stuff that didn't like I don't know. I came from the public school, so I would hear like a discourse that didn't fit with like my childhood friends and
Right.
the reality that I came from. And I'm from one of the best parts of Brazil, so there are parts that are like much poorer and much more dependent on the government and healthcare and stuff like that. So my region is actually fine compared to the rest of it.
And what part
Uh,
of Brazil are you from?
I'm
What's
from the southeast. It's called Minas Gerais. It's the second largest state, but not largest, but in terms of population, is one of the largest in Brazil.
okay?
And that region's the richest. The region that I live in is the richest in all of Brazil. So it is a different reality in and of itself. So it's not like compared to the rest of Brazil.
Hmm.
It's kind of different. And so the experience was pretty bad because it's all theory. They don't, although they have like a practical side to it. It's basically like I had 12 uh, periods that had like art history, and art history basically was like communism, left wing policy, and stuff like that. So it's always like in the middle of that. There was always a political aspect of it because these people believe that all art has to be political and it has to be a certain aspect of politics. Like it has to be that same type of voice, that same line of thought. So
It's
I
really
was
interesting to hear a Brazilian perspective because here in America, academia is seemingly completely captured by far left
yeah,
ideologies.
and that sprinkles. I used to say that everything because I'm pretty in touch, like you were mentioning in the intro. I work for Being Libertarian. I work for the Ripperverse, so I always had clients that were American, and it's always so I was pretty in touch with everything that happens there because once it happens in American academia, it's gonna sprinkle down like into the society, and then once society absorbs that, it's gonna sprinkle down in Brazil, like in other countries as well. Like so, the America is a pretty like significant outpost when it comes to the stuff that's gonna happen in other countries because the culture there is gonna have an adaptation in Brazilian culture as well. So in academia, I would hear like the same terms that I was hearing in other papers in papers outside Brazil, like in America and other in Europe and stuff like that. And then when it comes to Brazil, it gets even stronger because we're a third world country, so people are pretty in tune with like there is a lot of poverty, there is a lot of stuff like that. So people, especially young people, tend to think that the problems could be solved by the government. So they tend to revolt, and then they have that mentality that you need to be against like religion, you need to be for Marxism, and Brazil has a history of being like a left wing country because a lot because of what happens during the interventions of the United States in Brazilian politics during
Mhm.
the 60s. So that created like a martyr kind of mentality where people from the left were seen as the correct ones, but that couldn't achieve power. And then once they achieved power, they were the same. So everything stays the same. And we had like large scale corruption for 12 years. So I think that's pretty much all countries in the Western side, right? So history repeats itself, but you can see the discourse in America is gonna like be the Discord in South America, but adapted to translated to Spanish and Portuguese and French
Gotcha.
in some countries.
Well,
But that
American
was
culture and art has been one of our biggest and most successful exports. You
yeah,
know,
exactly. Like and then you see the other stuff like because art is. kind of unison in that regard. Like there is the same tune is going to be played over and over again in terms of the discourse. And if you want to get accepted into those mediums, you have to be of that same mentality. Because although art is the most individual thing that a human being can do, it's also like the one that's going to be scrutinized to like any other thing that you ever see. So if you're a dissonant voice, you better be prepared to stand your ground, because in art it's like there's very little hope that someone's going to support you, at least in public. You can get a DM or two, but it's really hard if you're not like in tune with what they want you to say and want you to sing about. So that
Absolutely. I
that
know
was
all
my
about it.
experience.
But I mean,
Yeah,
that's why I do this show, is to highlight dissident voices in the arts, because I think it's art has the ability to really challenge the power structure and
exactly.
challenge those those in government and positions of extreme power and influence, and
Yeah,
hold them accountable. And it's a shame to see how homogenous art and culture has become, and it's all and how much of this left wing, really far radical, authoritarian left wing ideologies have taken over the arts
exactly.
and music globally. And that's something that definitely I want to push back against.
Yeah,
So getting back to you, so you go to the university in Sao Paulo, and then you get accepted after that to study abroad in England, study
yeah.
illustration.
I went to study in a small town in England called Derby, which is like 200 miles, not even that, from London. So I went there, I studied there for a year, and I actually took like more classes than I was like supposed to, because I wanted to take the most from the experience that I was having, because I had never been abroad. I had never lived in another country, even set foot in another country. I didn't have a passport before that, so it was my first time abroad, and I wanted to take the most adventure that I could from it. Like, so I took all the classes that I could. I actually got awarded a degree, because an associate's degree is supposed to be like 1.5 years of education. I was only there for a year, but I got like a lot of credit, and I got a degree as an associate. I don't know what's called in
We
America,
do.
but
We have an associate's degree here in America. It's
oh
usually
yeah,
a
in England
two
is
year.
higher education. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what it is. So those are the same, but just different names. And then like the experience was completely different, because I actually had like to illustrate stuff. I actually had to sit down and like draw and paint and learn like how to use Photoshop. I didn't have a computer before, so I couldn't like I had no idea how to use those tools, and it was incredible for me. I'm always gonna be thankful to the teachers and the classmates that accepted me in there, like as if I was one of their own, and like guided me and helped me. I improved like a lot as an artist. It has been 10 years already, but it still has an influence over me. It was a really different experience, and I
Well,
also got to see like the different perspective of like going to a first world country, living there, and dealing with the, because you always hear like, oh, you're a Brazilian, you're going to a first world country, you're going to be treated like shit or something like that. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to curse, but
it's all right. You can curse on this. It's all right.
no, but I'm
You
gonna
speak
have a
freely.
kid soon. I don't want to curse in any language. Like I'm getting pretty potty mouth. I guess that's the expression, and I need to do better as a father. But
That's a good reason. That's a good reason to
yeah,
stop cursing.
and but yeah, people treated me like, dude, it was I have no, it was better than in Brazil, like for sure. And I had different ideas from them, but they were much more acceptant of those, and I had a really good time, like drawing and painting. That was basically what I did for a year, as opposed to Brazil, like
I'm
where I
glad you finally actually got to illustrate and draw and
yeah,
study art instead of just
yeah,
being inundated with
indoctrinated,
communist,
yeah,
indoctrinated with communist propaganda.
Yeah.
Fancy that, you know, you want to draw and they actually teach
You
you,
go to, yeah,
you
you
have
go to
classes on
fine art,
drawing.
then you have art classes. Like that's something new.
Yeah, what a novel concept. Um, well, yeah, you mentioned uh, you being interested in comics at a very young age and illustrating your own comics, and your dad giving you sheets of paper and you drawing Spider-Man and you know, other comic book characters, and Image being a big influence on you. Image being created was an independent comic company that was
Yeah,
created in the 1990s, that by Todd McFarlane, the creator of Spawn, and Rob Liefeld, who kind of cut his teeth illustrating, or you know, penciling for, I think, X Force and a bunch of different Marvel
yeah,
titles.
created a bunch of characters
And
like
then my
that.
favorite comic book artist, Jim Lee,
Yeah,
who did amazing work for Marvel with relaunching the X-Men series. I'm actually
yeah.
going back and rereading those 90s
It was
X-Men.
so good. Like I was reading
Amazing.
Hush the other day, like the Batman story. Jesus Christ, that it still stands out. Like it's so good.
Yeah, and those first like 15, it's like 10 to 15 issues of X-Men. The first few were written by Chris Claremont and illustrated by Jim Lee. But then
Yeah.
Jim Lee stayed on and until he eventually left to launch Image with those other comic book creators. But yeah, Image, I was a huge fan of all that stuff. And I actually wanted to be a comic book artist myself in
Oh
my early
really? Oh,
teens. Yeah,
that's
when I
nice.
was like 13, 14, I was committed to, I want to be a comic book artist. So I did very similar things. But then I found sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that's that took me down another path, brother. And I've
It
been
does. It really does.
but yeah, that was my goal. So yeah, I probably have read a lot of those same comics that you were into around that time.
Awesome. Yeah.
So when did you start working in comics, and then when did you get involved with Ripaverse?
So there's a pretty gap between those two because I started working with comics when I was living in England. I got my first gig. I was 23, so 10, 11 years ago. And then I started working for small, like independent comics. I did a cover for one comic book that went down, never went out. So my first gig never got published. I still have like the original here, but like I used to work black and white on paper because I didn't have a computer, like I said, and ink with like metal nibs and stuff like that. I still love that process of like just penciling something down and going over with ink, black ink, Indian ink, and but I did that for 5 years, like working with independent comic books, and I worked with a big one called it's a company called Killer Comics. It's the biggest one in Australia. They are independent, but they are the most famous one back in Australia, and they're so cool. Like they were very supportive of me. I asked for a rate, they paid me more because I was asking for too little, and shout out to Duncan. He's the best, and I worked with them for almost 10 years. Like I used to do covers for them before working with Eric. I did interior pages for them for a long time, and then I was like this. I was grabbing freelance work here and there, and one day I followed this page on Facebook that was huge, like 1 million people followed it, called Being Libertarian. And they used to make like a lot of memes, a lot of silly stuff about being libertarian. I was a left wing actually, so before I was pretty left wing in most of my during most of my teenage years, as most people are, I guess. And then I started listening to different voices and figuring out what was it that bothered me so much about the left wing propaganda and the speech like I was facing at the university, where I disagreed with the methods, but I agreed with the goals sometimes, even though I was misguided back then. But people were so resistant to different arguments that it made me rethink my position. Like, am I really like associating with this type of people that throw a fit and call me a fascist if I'm like 1 degree off of what they believe in. So I started to rethink that and realized that like anarchism and libertarianism was something that I was more in tune with. So I started reading and studying, and I read Thomas Sowell, which isn't really a libertarian, but he's like for small government and stuff like that. And I read, I think it's called in English, Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, and that changed my mind. Like I completely got to read a lot more of his stuff, and he even has a book about the elites, where he talks about how they influence culture and how they perceive the rest of the world. And it was pretty similar to my experience, the experience that I had back at the University of São Paulo. So that resonated with me. And one day I sent like a silly cartoon that I made of a guy pointing a gun at someone else, asking for money and saying it's for the greater good. And I sent that to Being Libertarian, to the page, and they replied right away asking if I wanted to work as a designer for them, making like the memes. They had meme ideas, but maybe they weren't like as proficient on Photoshop or stuff like that. So we used to make those, and that was what I did for the longest time because I was afraid of making something else or making myself uh, a libertarian for the public or something like that, because I
And
wanted
Being
to work.
Libertarian is it was primarily on Instagram. Was that the
Facebook,
page
actually.
on Facebook?
Yeah, it was huge on Facebook. Like more than 1 million people followed it. They used to make videos that were pretty funny, and then they started making memes, and it grew, and then like I started working there first as a designer, and then one day I took the courage of working as making some original art for them, and then it blew up. Like I and then everyone took notice of what I was doing. I think Rand Paul even shared like some of the cartoons that I was making, and Benny Johnson, people like that that were pretty influential on Twitter. And Eric July is the founder, is one of the founders of Being Libertarian. So when he was starting Rippaverse, a year before he launched the first comic book, he approached me and asked if I wanted to be a part of it, like work as an illustrator, make like designs for shirts, logos, all sorts of stuff. Like other than character designs, like basically every artwork outside of the magazine that you see is made by me, colored by me. So I joined because we had the same grievances with the comic book world. Like we wanted better stories, cool artwork. We wanted to be able to read stuff that resonated with us, even if it had the message. It was like a grand message. It wasn't something like think like this, act like that. If you do this, you're wrong or something like that. So I joined, and I've been working with Eric since 2020, I think. Yeah, so almost 4 years now. That's
That's
a long
awesome.
time.
Yeah, well, such a weird thing after the last 4 years of
Yeah,
insanity,
yeah, exactly.
of things that we would have never predicted, like governments locking people in their homes and
Yeah,
arresting people for not covering their faces, or people paddleboarding out by themselves
yeah.
in
That's the best
Malibu,
story ever.
and all the insanity of the last 4 years, yeah, has really kind of
I
created a warped
actually
sense of time.
I actually share, because then the Being Libertarian social outpost, like the group that we have, that's only Being Libertarian people that make memes and articles and stuff like that. We used to share during the lockdowns, like the stupidest like kind of warnings. And in Brazil, I had to translate mine because they were in Portuguese, obviously. But in Brazil, we had like sections of the supermarket closed to the public, although the supermarkets were open. Like, so you couldn't buy a microwave if you wanted, that was sitting there, but you could buy like fruits and vegetables. But everything
Yes.
was there at the same place. So
Well,
it's
they did the same thing in certain states. In Michigan, they did that, where the governor ordered that to be done. Whitmer, where there was essential aisles and non-essential aisles,
Yeah,
right? So yeah, you
yeah,
could buy like food, but you couldn't get, if you needed like tools or something, that was all like there was caution tape, like do not
yeah,
cross, police tape around that. And
yeah.
I saw that happening in other countries too. What insanity, what
Yeah,
lunacy.
yeah. What made me even madder is that like coffee was not an essential item, and I'm a pretty huge coffee drinker, so like coffee was taped off. I couldn't get coffee for a
Uh,
while.
Now that's cruel. I'm surprised there wasn't a full scale revolution.
Yeah,
As I enjoy my coffee right
yeah,
here,
exactly. Like I can't stop drinking this, but it's
but at the
insane.
same time, they probably allowed people to buy alcohol.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right.
Oh,
So to
please.
get
Yeah,
drunk, that was fine and essential, and that
completely
was
fine.
good for your health. But God forbid you get coffee.
Yeah, and Brazilians are pretty heavy drinkers, so if they that's the riot waiting to happen, right? If they forbid people from drinking alcohol, then you would see a revolution. But other than that, the Brazilian people are pretty passive when it comes to the government. They accept a lot of weird stuff that American would definitely throw at least like a tantrum, let's say, over it. Like there will certainly be like revolts and riots over it. But
Well,
Brazilian
yeah, I
people
want
are
to
very
talk
passive.
about the politics in Brazil and what life is like there right now. But
Oh
before we
boy.
get into that, I want to just stay on Ripaverse for another
Yeah.
moment. And for anybody out there that is not familiar with Ripaverse, Ripaverse was launched, as you said, by Eric July, and Eric July is a musician and a YouTuber, and he's a libertarian political commentator. And he launched with some other co-creators Ripaverse, I believe, in what 2022 is pretty recent,
Yeah, it's very recent.
pretty recent,
Uh,
and they launched it with their flagship comic, Isom, and it was all done through pre-sales and through crowdfunding. I think they were trying
yeah.
to
It
raise
was
like a
just pre-sales actually
right.
because
Okay.
crowdfunding Eric doesn't like that term because it assumes that because he took money from his own pockets to make it around like well, when I say like 200,000, it's not just the comic book making, obviously, but we were three, four people in his staff helping him with other stuff. So he had us on part time working, trying to build the website, graphics, and all sorts of stuff. And then he launched the comic book and set the goal of like 200,000 all uh, all bills are paid, something like that. Like so,
To
fees are
basically
met.
recoup
So
his money. Like
yeah, exactly.
he put the
That's the
initial
term.
capital out and to
Yeah,
have y'all working and to launch the
yeah,
comic
yeah.
book.
That
And
that was exactly the wording, like recoup fees, and then they made like 3.6 million or something like that.
which is amazing. And yeah,
Yeah,
now it's become one of the most, if not the most financially successful independent comic book companies of all time.
yeah,
And it's so amazing. And that's so hopeful, I think, for the future and for the future of content creators and of art in general, because it shows that people are really hungry for non-woke artwork
yeah,
and
yeah.
an art that is not going to lecture them and going to beat them over the head with one particular ideology or another. And it
Exactly.
shows that there's really a market for it. So congrats to yourself and to Eric and everybody involved with Ripaverse. And I wish y'all just more and more continued success. It's so awesome to
Thanks.
see.
Yeah, and I think we see that in other media as well, like music. Like we saw earlier last year that Rich Man North of Richmond, I think, that blew up and was pretty successful. I think people are getting tired of the same of being told they're bad, they're this or that. So I think people I'm not gonna say like they veer on the right direction when it comes to the best product. We all know that like taste varies and people are gonna like different things, but having an alternative is very important. And I think for a while people were they still are, but they were more resistant to different type of stuff, like different alternatives. They were, I think that's part of the appeal of the mainstream, is calling everything that isn't mainstream radical. So anything that wasn't like that, that's a radical song to hear. That's a radical comic book to read. You shouldn't support that because those authors are not the approved, like they don't have the approved message, right?
Right,
So
and not even radical. I mean, they'll use whatever slanderous term
yeah,
whatever
radical is nice, right?
pejorative. Yeah, radical sounds cool. They use racist and anti-Semitic and misogynistic and sexist.
Yeah,
Because
fascist is a big one in Brazil. People love to call others fascists, and eventually they call them Nazi as well. But fascist is the preferred word in Brazil. Like that's the one that sticks.
oh,
I
that
was
one
called
that
that
makes the
many
rounds
times.
here too.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I've been labeled both of those things for opposing, mandatory injections
yeah,
and
very
show.
fascist.
Yeah, it's like, these people are so blind to history. But the thing is, I don't even think it's that they're ignorant to history and knowing that like Nazis actually forced medical experiments on people, and that
Hmm.
was what the Nuremberg Code, the Nuremberg trials were all about. Were like showing that, establishing that everybody needs informed consent. You have to be able to give that to be part of any kind of medical experiment, and if not,
Yeah,
it's inhumane and a crime against humanity. But I don't think the far left authoritarians, the woke cult, I don't think they're ignorant to that history necessarily. I just think they're liars, and I think they like to gaslight, and um, it's a lot of projection. So
oh
they'll
yeah,
use any slanderous term they can to try to silence who they see as their opposition. They don't really
yeah,
believe it. It's effective, and that's why they do it. And
yeah,
that's why people have to think more critically and also look into things when somebody is being piled on, and to see if is that actually true, or are these people that are, is this outrage mob really the fascistic totalitarian force here?
yeah, yeah. And they do that to themselves as well, right? Like you can see artists and commentators that are left wing and are now like having a different opinion from most people, and they are called fascists even though they are like left wing as hell. Like it's funny, like I've seen Tim Mitchell. I don't know if you know who that is. He's like a musician and a comedian. He's as lefty as you as they come, like and he was calling out this behavior of like piling into people because they said something wrong, and throwing stones, and then having a glass ceiling because sometime you're gonna be the victim of that. If you say something wrong, they're gonna pile on you. And he was called like misogynistic or something like that. I don't remember the term that they use. And he's left wing, so no one's safe, right? Like
No, and that group just keeps getting smaller and smaller
yeah,
because they keep eating their own. They keep
yeah,
canceling anybody, and nobody is safe from it, right? Even though, um, and when we talk about like leftism and the left, like for me, I've always considered myself part of the left. Like my whole life, like I was anti-war. I was
yeah,
against censorship. I was against government overreach. I was distrustful of corporate power. A lot of those were left-wing principles,
yeah,
but the left has been co-opted by this authoritarian mindset, by wokeness.
yeah,
It has made the left cease to be liberal. The left no
yeah,
longer is. It's an anti-liberal mindset that has taken over the modern left.
yeah,
Which is a great segue into how our collaboration, because my new song with my band Faithless Town, Woke Town, is about that. It is about how the modern left has stopped being liberal and is actually anti-liberal, and that they seemingly no longer support women's rights and freedom of speech, and are no longer anti-war or pro-bodily autonomy. So I discovered your work through the Being Libertarian Instagram page, because I had written this song after my little run in with the outrage woke mob here in the little town of Athens, Georgia, in which I live. And it inspired me to write that song. And then I was trying to figure out like what would be the best like visual representation of that. And I discovered your work on Being Libertarian, and I think I discovered. I'll just show this piece. This was the first one I saw of yours, and I was like, "Oh, this guy gets it." I
Oh
was
yeah.
like, "That just sums it up to me."
Yeah, that
uh,
was fun to make. I was already like free of like being afraid of making stuff for being libertarian, because at first I would never do that. Like would never make that because I was afraid of the pushback. So
and so when did you what made you stop being afraid? Because I think that's a place that a lot of people are stuck at. Like how did you stop being afraid of being canceled, or people coming online and saying nasty things to you or making horrible accusations about you? How did you stop being afraid?
I don't actually remember the exact date, but I remember the exact piece that I made, because what was going on was we were at the beginning of the pandemic, so it was 2020, right? I think it was July 2020 or something like that. And I was watching some videos of the riots that were going on because of George Floyd in America, and that time period was crazy, right? So a lot of stuff was happening, but something caught my attention when a lady was having dinner with her acquaintances, and a mob went over to her and demanded that she raised her fist, and she refused.
Yeah, I put that footage in the Woketown video that
Yeah,
will be out.
awesome. Then yeah,
Yeah, I will share it with you. I know we're
that's awesome.
pre-taping this, so when this goes live, the Woketown video will be live, and it is essentially a compilation of all those the insane authoritarian actions of quote unquote leftists over the past few years, and I did include that clip.
That's awesome, because that's the one that caught my attention the most. Like I was obviously like upset about all that was going on, a lot of stuff that I didn't agree with. But I understand also like how people could be upset, and if you spill the right narrative, people are gonna be even more upset, especially if you feel like you're undermined by the government, by society. So I kind of get a little bit of the sentiment that was going on. People are angry and stuff like that, but then when I saw like they doing the same thing with a single person, that's the worst for me, because that's what I went through in college, when like mobs of people would when we were having like discourses and stuff like that. Because there is an election system inside the universities of Brazil where you elect some like a college team that represents the students. I don't know if they have a name for that in
It's
English. I
like
can't think of.
student council or something
Yeah,
like that.
something like that. And then each course is gonna make their own elections, each area at least. So the arts had their two representatives, and the whole university has a big one that actually doesn't serve any purpose. So me and like six friends decided to make a mock party. We were doing silly shit. We were playing bingo with the stuff that they usually say, and yelling bingo during their discourses. We were making like skits from that. Oh God, I can forget the name. Oh my, the group from England, the comedy group from
Oh,
England,
Monty Python.
Monty Python. They had
Yeah.
like an albatross bit. We made one of those. So we were making fun of them. We were like young. We had 20 years old. We were like just making fun. And then during the election, we had a ludicrous name that I can say, like I can translate because it's kind of nasty. But then we got elected, like at the small level. So we were representatives for a bit. And during that, like the it was hell, because any gathering, any discussion about what's going to be done, we would oppose, because the rest of the people were all left wing. And then like people crowded over us, like it became a one versus the rest. And I saw that in that video. I saw that woman facing the same thing, and she stood her ground. She didn't raise her fist, and that resonated with me. And I was afraid of like showing what I believed in, but then at that point I decided was enough. I wanted to make art that represented that. So I made a mob of masked people, all in the same tone, reddish tones, like a blob or something like that. Uh, all fists raised, demanding that she did that or she would be a fascist. So, and she was just like cowering back. And that's the one that Rand Paul shared, and a lot of people shared. Being Libertarian was nice enough to share it, and then it blew up, and it got me confident. I got a lot of pushback, but I got a lot of support, and I saw that a lot of artists were afraid to say that same thing, but in my DMs they were like, oh, I like this, this is so cool, like I'm glad someone's talking about this, someone is making this. And I was like, yeah, all right, so I can do this. And I don't agree with a lot of what Jordan Peterson says, especially nowadays. Like, it's kind of crazy. But he said something back then that resonated with me in regards to this story, because he said that, like, if you keep lying to yourself, you're only poisoning your soul. And I believe that in some aspect, because once I started admitting what I was and making art that I found interesting, uh, things got better for me. Like, I got a better job, I got a better offer, I improved that as an artist, I got a lot of support from people that believed in me. I lost a lot of support from other people, but I think there is truth to that. Like, and if you keep lying, you're not gonna go very far, I think, because you don't believe that, and at some point that's gonna crush your hopes, and you're not gonna wanna make art anymore, because it's all about inspiration. So that's how, like, I started making those little cartoons that I make every
Well,
so
and that's
often.
a beautiful story, that and a beautiful sentiment is the more authentic you became and more comfortable you became with what you really felt and believed and vocalizing that, more of these doors open for you. And
Yeah,
you found your audience, or they found you, and you found these connections in multiple industries. That's a beautiful thing, because I think a lot of people are just so afraid to speak out because they think of all the opportunities they'll lose and the
yeah.
friends that they'll lose. But how do you deal with the haters? How do you, like you said, you got a bunch of pushback. What's your approach to dealing with them? Because
Well,
I'm always like going back and forth. I usually will just like, I'll give them a chance right off the bat if somebody actually wants to have a dialogue, which is extremely rare, and they usually
yeah.
never do. Um, but like, as soon as they, just start wishing death threats and spewing vulgarities, I usually just block them, because what else
That
can you do
yeah,
with
that's a
abusive people like that?
that's a wise way to go about it, I think. Well, especially with the Rippaverse and me being like one of the artists for it, we got a lot of pushback that's like kind of vitriolic. People just want to spill their hate or criticize your artwork until nothing's left. Like, and it can get to you. Like, when I was drawing some of the stuff that we were making, I was like, oh, maybe I should fix this foot or that hand, or maybe this is too big or out of proportion. Starts to get to you as an artist. You start to rethink your what you're doing, and it stops being fun. So I tried my best to stop reading a lot of the comments. I would still read pretty much all of them, but I don't engage anymore with most. And when I do, it's like I try to be as kind as possible. So I like I said, I'm trying not to curse, so I won't curse someone that I don't know, and I won't push back on stuff that's like personal taste. I try my best not to do that. With the Being Libertarian pieces, a lot of people try to reframe it as something else, so I will always try to make my point clear whenever someone messages me. At least with the comments, like, it's crazy. There's no way I can go over, like, read every comment that they have on their pieces. But if someone messages me or comment on my own personal page on Instagram or Twitter, I will engage with them as much as I see that, like you said, they're trying to have a discussion, which rarely happens. Most of the time they try to reframe it as like I'm being bigoted or I'm being racist, I'm being elitist or something like that. So I don't have a lot to say about those, because those people are already have their mind settled on what they believe in. So there's no way you're gonna convince someone like that of something else. But I actually had cool conversations with people on the left on some of my artwork, but it's not always that fruitful. I try to remember those, but sometimes you just have to keep doing what you're doing, because criticism can poison your process if it is too mean or too vitriolic. Like I said, like you can get to your head. As an artist, it's more important to focus on what you think you can improve, and then ask, if you ask for advice, ask for people who you admire or are better than you in some aspect, like I do with artists that I'm fond of, and then you'll try to improve like that. That's all you can do, really, I think.
I think that's great sound advice. Well, getting back to our collaboration on
Yeah,
Woketown, Igor created this amazing artwork for my new single Woketown that is out now, and just tremendous, tremendous, man. I think I had sent you that earlier piece that I discovered of from Being Libertarian, where the mob's saying
yeah.
being tolerant like us, and I was like this, but can you make it more realistic? And you just ran with it, and this piece just blew me away. So thank you so much for creating this amazing piece of art to accompany the new Faithless Town song, Woke Town. I appreciate you, brother.
My pleasure. That was a lot of fun to make. When I was working on it, I was talking to my wife, like, how cool is it? Like, people get in touch with me to make stuff that I actually believe in. Like, this is completely different from the stuff that I had like 5 years ago or something like that. Which goes back to what I was saying. Like, once you speak the truth of what you believe in, even if it is misguided, and people then can correct you on that. Like, you get to meet a lot of people that think alike you, and then you can improve together, right? So you can have discussions. It's important to talk to other people, but as an artist, I'm sure you know that, like, it can get pretty lonely when like everyone's on the other side. So it's nice to be able to work with stuff that you actually enjoy.
Absolutely. And if anybody wants to pick up a cool Woketown t-shirt
Oh yeah.
featuring Igor's art, there will be
Yep.
a link in the show notes, and you can buy this. It will be available at faithlesstown.com. And they're
Yeah, yeah.
super soft. I recommend the tri-blend cotton t-shirts because they're super, super comfy.
Yeah, like I said with the Reaperverse, because I have like two shirts out with my designs. Like, tag me once you're wearing them on photos and stuff like that, because I love seeing those. Like, that's one of my favorite things of the Reaperverse, is when people tag me on fan art of the characters, and then when people tag me on, like, oh, I'm wearing your shirt or something like that, it makes my day, because it's so fun to see like the stuff that you make all out and people enjoying it. It's the most fun I can have,
It's
other than
awesome.
drawing.
And yeah, and you sent me a time lapse of you making that piece for the Woketown
Yeah.
single, which I'm gonna share. And by the time this broadcast, I may have already shared it, but it was so cool just seeing that come to life. And I guess most of the work you do now is on an iPad as an illustrator,
It's actually on I can't show because my camera is
or
stuck,
it's like a
but I
drawing. It's
have
some sort
a
of digital
drawing
pad.
tablet. Yeah. So nowadays I work mainly digital because it saves space and time. But I'm always a sucker for traditional art. The previous artist that we had working on uh, the Reaperverse is a Brazilian called Joe Bennett, and he worked for Marvel for the longest time, and he works all like traditional, and it's crazy to see the pages like in real life like this. But yeah, it saves time. I have the volume of work that I have at the Reaperverse is constant, so it's quicker for me to work digitally. So everything I do basically is digital. one or other drawing I will start scribbling on a paper, which is a part of the process that I enjoy, like the thumbnails and stuff like that. But then I have to take a picture and like send it to a computer or just like start sketching based on that thumbnail. And everything is gonna be made on computers for me at least. Coloring is something that's much easier on a computer. So it it's not good if it serves as a crutch, but it's a good tool to have at your disposal if you want to work as an artist. Nowadays, it's like pretty much invaluable. There are very few mediums that will allow you to work traditionally nowadays if you want to work with art.
It's amazing to think about how the old process was, the traditional process of making comics, of one
Yeah,
person penciling each frame and then it being sent to the inker to ink over and fill in those shadows and create those shadowing, and then it go to the colorist and it be colored, and that was all being done by hand, right?
yeah,
For the
yeah.
bulk of comic history, right?
Yeah, for most of comic book history, that was the way. That there weren't like scanners, and I actually got mentored by a man called Marcelo Campos, which is the owner of a pretty famous art school in Brazil called Quanta. They mainly focus on illustration and comic book art, and he used to work like paper and then mail the pages to Marvel. So they would get all the Brazilian artists, send the comic book pages to São Paulo, and then send that to Marvel or DC or whatever. Think how crazy that is. Like
It's
if one of those got lost, like it's an entire month of comic books because there were a lot of Brazilian working uh, with DC and Marvel back in the 90s, and it's just insanity to think
insane to
about.
think of, and to think about like making deadlines and stuff too. You had to take into account like, okay, well, this might take this many days or this many
Yeah,
weeks to ship to New York.
yeah,
Yeah, that's so wild, and those are the positive things that digital technology has given us, allowed
yeah.
content creators to create so much more efficiently and affordably.
Yeah, like how do you think it compares to when you start making music to nowadays? Like, is it? I'm a complete noob when it comes to music, so but I can imagine it changed everything. Like having,
Oh, yeah. I mean, back in the day, they were using 2-inch tape and reel-to-reel machines, right? So if they wanted to edit together, say, 2 takes, somebody with a razor blade and tape had to actually make a cut on the tape, find, where it needed to match up on the other take, cut that, and tape it together. Like, I've heard on the old Simon and Garfunkel albums from the '60s that sound so beautiful and the harmonies are perfect, but there's different takes spliced together, and that was somebody meticulously doing it by hand with a razor blade and tape,
then you
taping the
miss
tape
by
together.
like a second, and
Yeah, and
everything has to be recorded again.
exactly, exactly,
That's
and I mean,
insane.
I guess, like, video film editing it was a similar process. Now that
Yeah.
all can be done digitally. There were things that I think, there's a trade-off where you go from analog equipment, which has a really rich sound, to, an analog can actually capture a higher, spectrum of audio frequencies than digital
Hmm.
can, which I think is for some reason why there's been a resurgence of vinyl and people buying, records again.
Hmm.
But everything used to be recorded analog, like those 2-inch machines, and so it just had this natural analog warmth, and now, most things are being recorded into a computer through Pro Tools or Logic or some other recording software. So there is that trade-off, but there's things you can still do to kind of, bring in that analog warmth again, in the mastering process. But yeah, it's definitely made it a lot easier, and I think it's also created this oversaturation of music because anybody
Yeah,
with a computer or even an iPhone or smartphone can record music and put it up on SoundCloud.
yeah.
So, and it's also made it so, pitch correction and quantizing things, snapping things to the grid. It's maybe reduced some people's musicality or their technical skills because you can use pitch correction to fix your singing. You can use the rhythm correction, the quantizing to fix your rhythmic playing for drummers and so forth.
Right.
So there's those things. But yeah, it's like anything else. I think it's about using it to your benefit and not trying to be a slave to it, just like using it to help
Right.
bring your art into the world.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's pretty much the same in the visual art world. I think comic books have the benefit of like still valuing a lot of traditional art because there is an entire market of like originals that people buy. So if you get like an original by Todd McFarlane, it's gonna be worth like he sold one for almost $1 million. So a lot of artists want to still use that market, so which is an extra revenue, right? Much like DVDs were for the movie industry back then, like they used to make a lot of money out of the DVDs. Traditional art in comic book sells for a lot, so you can get a lot of money out of that other than the page rate that you get. So you can get extra income. First appearances of characters and all that sell a lot for a lot of money.
Yeah,
So there is that. Like there is still value in having a traditional uh, workplace like an workflow.
I'm a big proponent of physical media. You know,
Yeah.
we're living in a world where the elites are blatantly saying they want us to own nothing and have no
Yeah.
privacy and be happy and everything to be in a cloud that we rent, from our cars to our food to our cooking utensils. So I'm a big proponent of own physical media. Like I've got thousands of CDs. I I buy comics. Like I've been going back and buying all these old comics from my
Hey,
childhood,
yeah,
like the old X-Men. And I've been reading all the old G.I. Joe comics from like the 80s into the 90s. And I've got like 3 issues left and they're so incredibly
that's so cool.
expensive.
Yeah, I have. I was going over my books here, like just going through them, and I found like my Spawn #1 that I had 2 copies, and I still have one. But that's like something. Of course, you can find online, but it's not the same as having like the real thing
I
on
mean,
your
I had
hand.
Spawn #1. I had all those Image #1s, like Youngblood, Wildcats,
That's awesome.
Spawn,
Yeah.
and I had them in a storage space out in LA, and I had to go back to my hometown of Pittsburgh for a while. And when I came back, the storage unit had been completely
Oh
burglarized, and they
man,
stole all my comics, man. That's why I had all these old X-Men's that I'm now rebuying. I had to rebuy them on
I need
eBay.
to rebuy them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
was
crazy.
heartbroken. Um,
Yeah, that's one of the things that Eric, because he's 33, I think, so he's about the same age as I am, a little younger, and he is a pretty big proponent of like having physical media. So all the Rippaverse stuff is always printed. He has gotten better deals out of printing. He has like an entire logistical system to ship to make sure everything arrives like as smoothly as it can. Like things arrive in Brazil for me like pretty neat, packed consistently. So yeah, he loves that, and I think there is a an extra value to having something in your hand because we don't know, right? Like I'm a gamer myself, so I have a lot of games on Steam, and if Valve decides to close Steam, I lose all the games that I have. So you're at the mercy of bigger wheels when it comes to the stuff that you own if you don't
well,
have like a physical copy.
and censorship all being driven by
That
this totalitarian anti-liberal leftism
yeah.
is it's creating things like sensitivity readers where they're literally rewriting the works of Roald Dahl and
Yeah, that's crazy.
Mark
That's a
Twain and classics. So dude, you're getting to the point where it's going to be hard to find the original version of a book with the author's true intentions and true, like, real prose in it. Like, how Orwellian is that? They
yeah.
have sensitivity readers that are rewriting classic literature.
Yeah, and
And
that's funny because if you talked about that 5 years ago, people would call you crazy. And then you see that happening in libraries and stuff like that, right? So you see books that are being corrected. And then when you talk about that like 5, 10 years ago, people are like, "Oh, you're thinking of like Fahrenheit from Bradbury. Like that stuff is never gonna happen. It's just a dystopia nightmare or something like that. And then, yep, sure
And here,
enough, if you change your words nicely, if you put them in the right order, people will like eat that up.
and we're seeing into things like TV shows, namely "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia." There's 5
Oh yeah,
episodes of that show. It's that show has only existed in the last decade,
yeah.
and there's 5 episodes of that show that are completely scrubbed. You can't buy on Amazon. You can't
Community,
stream them.
yeah, Community has an episode that isn't aired anymore because they are playing role playing game, and one guy that dresses as a drow, which is a dark elf, and the joke is, oh, that's so inappropriate. Like that's the joke. Like the characters are reacting negative to that, and they had to pull that episode from Netflix because the guy is like, oh, it's blackface. Yeah, but they're making a joke about that, like about how out of touch that is, and you're taking that episode out, like you're painting that picture that the world is such a nice place that people wouldn't even consider doing that as a joke. Like that's not how it works. Like
Well,
real world's not.
totalitarians don't have any sense of humor. But we're almost out of time, Igor. It's been such a pleasure. What is next for you, and where can people find you and support your work?
So I'm on Twitter. My social media gets confused, but if you search like Igor Chakal, Chakal, you're gonna find me on Twitter. I'm pretty active there. I'm somewhat active on Instagram, but some of their metrics let me down a little bit, so I'm not as active there. But you can find me on Twitter. If people want to DM me about artwork, I'm always up for that. Like I love helping other artists get their stuff in order or try to help them in some way that I can. I'm still learning myself, so it's always nice to have someone learning with me. And yeah, but that's basically where you can find me. Chakal underscore Igor, Igor. That's basically where I'm at.
Awesome, brother. Well, this hour is just blown by because I really
Yeah,
enjoyed our conversation. There's even other stuff that I wanted to get into, so maybe we can save that for another future episode. But thanks
sure.
again for the amazing artwork you did for my band's new single, Woke Town. I'm going to put links to that in the show notes. I'll put links to your social media and to the Rippaverse in the show notes. Please, everybody, go follow Igor Shakal on all the socials. And until next time, stay fearless and live free. There ain't no love.